Well, we're delighted to have Ben White here. Ben's a longtime friend of the Bush School and has a long and distinguished career of public service. And I'll let him start off by talking a little bit about his background. But he's worked a lot in the nonprofit community with various Texas associations, mostly associated with the medical community as well. So how many of you want to work in nonprofits, nonprofit management, and think about it?
Got a selling job to do.
Last time we had the audience was primarily those people who are interested in nonprofit management, and the mayor was able to talk to that. Mayor here, and also mayor in Garden City, Garden Ridge, Texas, and his spouse is also a mayor of a small town, and so we've got a lot of mayoral background here. And the reason we asked the mayor to come in particular because he's someone who's had a variety of interests and a variety of positions in his background. And so part of what we can talk about too is the nature of public service, how it varies between nonprofit sector, associations, being the executive director of several nonprofits, as well as mayor of College Station, which is a challenging thing as well. So he's run for election. He's had to manage budgets. He's had to do a lot of administrative things, and all for the greater good of the community. I can say that in sitting and watching his leadership of the community, it was very instructive for me in understanding a lot about it. And so I was so moved that I attended the 2008 College Station Citizens University. I wasn't the honor graduate, but I did participate, and I thought that was an important initiative. And what it gave me was insights into the complexity of the leadership and management challenges of a mayor and city managers and all the rest. So please give a warm round of applause and welcome Mayor White. And I'll ask a few questions just to get started, but then we really want him to be able to engage with you and your questions. So first of all, Mayor, tell us a little bit about the background that I made reference to, and what positions in particular have shaped your approach to leadership.
Okay. I've got to start. I'm sorry. Howdy.
Howdy.
There you go. Now we're off on the right foot. Thank you, folks, very much for letting me spend some time with you, and thank you for hosting me here. I appreciate it very, very much. What I've done in the past, and please feel free to step in and say, no, that's not the direction you want to go if you feel like it's not. I've sort of shared with the group my background, and that has led to other comments that pop into my mind that I want to share. It's led to questions from the audience, and it seems to work pretty well. So again, if that's not how we want to do it, please stop me. First up, we got to ask, anyone in here from Austin? Okay. Yep. Other than enemy country, I was born and raised in Austin. The way I normally start telling my story, when I was probably 8th grade, maybe 9th grade, thereabouts, my grandfather, who had been in business in Austin for umpteen years, turned age 65, went to his 3 boys after he had retired from his business, and said there was something he would like to do with the remainder of his life, but he needed their help financially. Well, one of his boys was my father, and his 3 sons were doing well financially. My father and an uncle were physicians, and a 3rd son of my grandfather's was in business, successful businessman. So they said, all right, we'll finance whatever it is you want to do, but what do you want to do? He was 65 years old. Which is young, getting younger every day. Right, younger every day. Yeah. He said, I want to run for the Austin City Council. And they said, at age 65, and he said, yes. So they agreed they would finance his first campaign, and then after that, win, lose, or draw. Have you heard this story?
No.
I'm sorry. I'm repeating. I apologize. Win, lose, or draw.
Here who's heard of it.
He would be on his own. So they financed it, and he ran, and he won. He was 65, and continued winning until he was 81 years old. For 16 years, he ran, and never was mayor of Austin, but was mayor pro tem much of the time, much of those 16 years. When he retired from the council, the city wanted to rename an existing street for him. He wouldn't allow that because he's from South Austin, and he had a lot of friends who owned businesses in South Austin, and they would have had to change their name and, incur some expense. But he said, I won't allow that, but should you ever have a new street that you're going to cut through in the future, I would let you, I'd be honored to have your name it. We kidded him till the day he died, telling him he didn't want just a little old street, he wanted a boulevard in Austin. So if you've ever been on Ben White Boulevard, that is named after my grandfather, and that's the story of how that evolved. And that's to lead me into, I guess there's something in my DNA, because I've watched him when I was a young fella. I watched his career, and then after he passed away, obviously, we always was talking about him and reviewing things he'd done. And I'd always hear people when I'd go to Austin and introduce myself, they'd say, "Oh yeah, they've got a boulevard named after you, don't they?" And I'd say, "No, but my grandfather," and they'd always say, "Really?" And that would allow me to tell stories. But he was a neat guy, and he was a people person. And I think one of the thoughts that I had as I was reading some of your notes was that, what sort of formed my philosophy for politics and things probably was my grandfather, because he never ever forgot that, I hate to say little person, but his base, his strength in Austin was the city employees. And he had a love for the Austin Fire Department. I have a love for the College Station Fire Department. I've done anything, I'll ride out with them at night. I just love these guys, and I think I got a lot of this from my grandfather. So that is the initial part of my story relative to how did I come about having a love for politics. Education-wise, I was a high school football coach. As I jokingly say, I lost too many football games, so I had to go out and get an honest living. So I was a director of the medical society. My father was a physician in Austin, like I mentioned. For a period of time, I represented a pharmaceutical company in San Antonio, and through that involvement, I ended up getting my master's from Southwest Texas in San Marcos. And through that involvement led me to a position as executive director of the Bexar County Medical Society, which at that time were the 3,500 physicians in San Antonio. So I did that for 20 years, and that's probably how my whole philosophy on leadership, both nonprofit and otherwise, began to formulate. I know very early on when you work with physicians and dentists, they are people who are very, very educated, very, very intelligent. They're people who have things on their mind that they want to see done, and they don't like a lot of bumps in the road between point A and point B to get those desires and those goals accomplished. And so I learned real quick that as an executive director, you were the chief paid staff person, and your president was the chief elected person. So I was the chief paid, and he or she was the chief elected. And so early on, what we would do is we'd sit down at the beginning of every year, and we'd change officers, right? A new boss in effect every year. So what we would do is sit down and sort of get on the same page. And this is going to sound corny, but I've used it for 25 years. I used it when I was at the Texas Dental Association with the new president that came in each year. But it was my visual of how I thought an association ought to be run. I would sit with the president. I'd say, "Okay, here's what let's do. You are the occupants of this school bus, and I'm the bus driver. You tell me where you want to go. What you don't do is tell me how to get there. You tell me you want to go to point A, but you don't tell me to go one block and take a right and 3 more blocks and take a left. It's my job to get you there as safely and as quickly as possible. And if I don't do that job, then it's your job to replace me." And that philosophy has worked for many, many years for me in a nonprofit sector. And to a little bit lesser degree, when I was mayor of Garden Ridge, we were a teeny tiny little burg, and we had no staff. But when I was mayor here at College Station, the city manager and I pretty much had that same philosophy. Now, he wasn't able, if I didn't do if he didn't do what I wanted to do, I couldn't fire him. But the intent was there. So it's all about teamwork. It's another way of telling the president of the Medical Society, the president of the Dental Association, that we were a team. He was the chief elected, I was the chief paid, and together we could accomplish those goals that he or she wanted. So that was sort of a leadership thing that I learned early on. And then after I was at the medical side for 20 years as a director, I guess I got antsy and I wanted to, in association management, and I know there's no one in here that's interested, but as I said earlier, my son graduated out of this school a number of years ago and didn't realize he was watching what I was doing as he was growing up. And he is first to go into city government, and he's now in his 20th year as executive director of the Texas Psychological Association. So he works with psychologists here in the state of Texas. So I left Bexar County because I was interested in maybe moving up the ladder some, and I became executive director of the Texas Dental Association, which again at that time was 7,500 dentists in the state of Texas. And that brought a very interesting challenge. It was on a state level. I was much more involved with daily activities relative to lobbying, became a registered lobbyist, officed in Austin. The TDA had their headquarters in Austin. So we had a large staff. We had a paid outside lobbyist, but there were two of us on staff, myself and the director of the legislative department. There were also registered lobbyists. So that added an additional dimension of what my duties would be, and just sort of broadened my scope of what I was interested in doing. From there, my wife and I moved. I stayed there 5 years. Austin traffic, as you two ladies know, is a complete zoo. Total complete zoo. Moved to Sun City, Georgetown, and got involved with the city of Georgetown, became their chairman of their Parks and Recreation Department. Just like College Station has a very, very active, well thought of Parks and Rec Department. Georgetown did also. Georgetown, I didn't realize at the time they were copying a lot of what they did in Georgetown from what there's done here in College Station, and I learned about that after the fact. But that, again, was a different venue, if you will. It wasn't elected, it was appointed. The council appointed all their committee members, and so it was an appointed position. But it gave me insight, once again, working daily with the staff of the Parks and Rec Department of Georgetown. What I failed to mention, and this I think is critical because it's just another side of the elected equation. When we were in Bexar County, my family and I lived out anybody from Comal County, lived out in unincorporated Comal County, the southern part of Comal County. The main town and city in Comal County is obviously New Braunfels. We were, like I say, unincorporated. We learned one day, I was a vice president of the HOA, which is the Homeowners Association. I learned one day from the president of the Homeowners Association that both San Antonio and Schertz were contemplating bringing our little unincorporated area into their ETJ, their extraterritorial jurisdiction. Did we want that to happen? So we had a hurried call meeting of the membership of the HOA, and 100% of them said, no, we did not want that to happen. So what you do then is you either let it happen, or if you don't want it to happen, you got to take measures to prevent it, and that is to incorporate it. So we incorporated that little community, which became known as Garden Ridge, Texas. My friend, the president of the HOA, was a Vietnam fighter pilot out of the Vietnam era. He became the first mayor, and I became the first mayor pro tem of Garden Ridge, Texas. And we served that way for about 11 years, and then got a call one day when I had become the director of the Medical Society. I was the director of the Medical Society, and he said, I'm tired, I'm quitting. I said, Paul, you can't do that. You've got 9 months left on your term. He said, I'm quitting, I'm through. So I became the mayor of Garden Ridge, Texas, and fill out his term. So that's where I come about 2 mayors. Then we moved here to College Station. Met the current mayor at that time, Sylvia, through our church. And I told him, we became friends. I said, yeah, I sort of like being involved in these types of things. If you ever have a committee that you can maybe use my help. And I told him about my Parks and Rec involvement in Georgetown. And I said, I'd like to serve on y'all's. Y'all have an excellent Parks and Rec department. He said, well, let me see. Called me back a few weeks later, and he said, want you to serve on the city's planning and zoning commission. Well, I knew enough about city politics back then to know that was a lightning rod. That was where all the action was. So I got appointed to that and served for 3 years, and then after that ran for council, then for mayor. And that's sort of my story from that standpoint. I would say my grandfather was a very big influence in my life, just again as a young man watching him. I would say Mayor Davis of Garden Ridge, an old crusty fighter pilot out of the Vietnam era, had no staff, he was it, and just watched him grow that city to what it is today. It's truly, it was a bedroom, and is a bedroom city, very, I guess this sounds bad, but it's evolved into a very affluent bedroom city north of San Antonio, and so it's well done. They do a good job there. And then probably locally, a non-elected person that I have a lot of admiration for, and that was the city manager, Glenn Brown. Glenn and I, he knew of my association background, and he knew of my philosophy working with, when I was in association with elected officials, and he had much of the same philosophy working with elected political type figures. And so we got along famously, and he'd run things by me, I'd run things by him, and we had a good time together.
Let me ask a question, and then we'll turn it open to the students here. But the thing, when I attended Citizens University, I knew absolutely nothing about local city government, even though I lived here for a few years up to that point. What really impressed me, though, was the level of professionalism and the range of activities that people were doing. So you know, a lot of times people complain about their government and all that. You know, are they getting their tax money or not? And so, you know, in a thumbnail, could you explain what the I won't call them business practices is, but leadership and management and the professional nature of the civil service at the local level, and how you tried to steer that, or what you learned from your time doing that?
I was absolutely amazed, and I've long since forgotten the number, but it's substantial, it's large, the number of management level employees the city of College Station, and that's to include fire and police personnel that have at least a bachelor's, and many of them have a master's. It's impressive, it's extremely impressive. What it does, and I've set in, even though one of my big bugaboo is don't micromanage, I tried hard not to micromanage, but City Manager Brown said, why don't you just come and sit in on our management team meetings that they have every week. And so I did that for a while. Unbelievable. It was a group, all the department heads, police chief, fire chief, public works, finance, et cetera, all of them, multiple degree, and they sat down and they discussed, they strategized at a very high level. And I was impressed. And this is what, I guess, one of the hardest things when you're an elected official and you go to the store to get a gallon of milk and you're accosted in the aisleways. Most of the time it was excellent. I mean, you know, hey, thank you for what you do, good job. But they'll always say, well, you know, the trash is supposed to be picked up on Friday, and it wasn't. We got the worst public works department in town, and blah, blah, blah. And I'd have to sit down and give my story about the level of expertise, the level of education, the level of integrity and efficiency of our city staff. Now, are you going to have some bad apples? Absolutely. No question about that. But on balance, they're great people.
Yeah. Yeah, and the variety of disciplines as well. I mean, one of the police lieutenants was a graduate of the Bush School. Yeah. And I got to see him in action, and a lot of work on Homeland Security, which of course became a big issue post 9/11. But then engineers working for the city utility company, Power Generation Group. I mean, it was just very impressive.
That, if I may,
yeah.
You just struck a chord there. I am extremely, not as active as I had been, a big proponent, and was very active when I was serving on high-speed rail, bringing high-speed rail to the state of Texas, and I was on the state committee to work on that. We obviously engaged our very appropriate staff people to be part of that process. And the engineering level of our transportation department for the city was just unbelievable. Yeah. It was very good.
Yeah, and then of course the information technology and
yes.
everybody trying to figure out how to get a web page up and running and make that user-friendly
yes.
for the public.
Yes.
Okay, so graduate students, anybody thinking a little bit more along the lines of working for in city government, city and local government? Not sure? Any questions in general for the mayor?
Yes, sir.
You've spent extensive time in the nonprofit sector, as well as now you've outlined for us many, many years in city and local government. I was wondering if you could try to compare and contrast those experiences for us and tell us kind of the benefits and downsides of either working in nonprofits or working in government.
From the nonprofit standpoint, I would jokingly say with my brief time as a coach, in nonprofit, I was just dealing with big kids versus smaller kids when I was in the school business. But in association work, and I was blessed because I was in both medicine and dentistry, and those are very high level of intelligence, and I was blessed with working with people who wanted the best for their profession, and that led me to do what I could as a non-physician or a non-dentist to support them in achieving their goals. I hope I'm answering some of your questions. What we would do is I would have, again, I told you one of the school bus story, but the president of the association and I would get together in this orientation session we'd have at the beginning of each year, and I'd say, whenever it comes to the media and deal with the media, if it was an issue relative to medicine or health related, then we'd always get the president of the medical society to be the spokesperson. If it was an issue relative to the administration of the medical society or something more of an administrative nature, then I would be the spokesperson, and that works very, very well. And this is pretty much just a segue into city government. The way it is here, because in College Station, as an example, we're blessed to have a public relations department of true professionals that whenever they get questioned by the media, normally the mayor is the first point of contact, but if it's on an issue that there's maybe a council person might be better suited to respond, or another staff person might be better suited to respond, then that's how that is worked. I don't think I went around your, maybe I did.
Well, let me just build on that a little bit. So one thing that's very different, of course, in politics is working with something like the state legislature. Did you have any lessons you learned from that experience that you would pass on?
Yeah, very much so. Again, we've all got, at least my philosophy is we all have to be a team. So we were in very close contact with our state senators, our state representatives. We had an outside lobbyist for both the state level as well as the national level. We had some internal disagreements because at that time Lloyd Doggett, not Lloyd Doggett, she was nice, he's a representative of Austin, who was our Chet Edwards was our longtime representative.
Congressman Chet Edwards.
Right, and we had a great relationship with Chet. And a lot of some of our elected people thought that we should not be spending taxpayers' money to pay for Washington lobbyists when we had a dear friend as an elected official in Washington. That philosophy didn't prevail, and we kept our Washington lobbyists. We worked very closely, much more closely, with our state lobbyists, and we would go to Austin frequently, and I'd go up here as the mayor representing the city up here, before this committee or that committee, along with our lobbyists. Yes, sir.
I have a question talking about teamwork in regards to key indicators that you can look for when you're trying to monitor group effectiveness in the group that you're in. What are some key indicators that you look for when you do that?
I always look to see if there's somebody that tends to be in line with the philosophy of micromanagement, and I think on balance from a team effort, that's deadly. I'm not a micromanager person at all. I try to identify, and I'm not going to be able to be specific on what indicators, but if that person comes across as wanting to be a team player, part of the team, that's extremely important. Team mentality. If they are aggressive from the standpoint of being positive with their thoughts and their suggestions they might have to the resolution of a particular issue, and particularly along those lines, if they're willing, if their strong feeling about a particular issue maybe doesn't prevail, they're willing to back off and hear the other side of this story. Oftentimes probably more often in my nonprofit career than my elected career, you get very strong mindsets, and he or she has an idea, and it's the best idea there is, and will not take no for an answer. That always presents a challenge.
Yeah, we'll get to you in a second. But did you ever have to counsel individuals and talk to them about behaviors that you felt were hurting the ability of the city to be able to accomplish its objectives?
City, I did. I had to have a closed door session with one of my councilmen, who was at the time a professor at A&M. And that's always, that was always a fun
Talk
thing
about
to do.
leadership
Yeah,
challenge.
yeah. But it was a good example. We became dear friends. But he came on the council and he had his agenda of things he wanted to accomplish while he was in office. And there was going to be nothing to deter him from doing that. And we had to sit and visit with him a little bit about, we're a council of 7, and your vote is 1 vote, and that's all. And we'll do whatever we can to get everything you want done accomplished. But it's going to have to blend in with the will of the council.
How'd you do that without offending him or making him feel bad? Or
You probably know
just
who I'm talking.
charming?
Well, no. Sometimes when someone comes at you with both fish, you got to go back with both fish. And he was the type of
That I can understand.
no, he was a gentleman that he was very assertive and very aggressive, and I got rather assertive and very aggressive, and we had a meeting of the minds, and I saw his position, he saw my position, and it was perfect. Very productive.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
When you're a newly elected official or a new director in some certain organization, how do you define priorities to accomplish the mission of the organization? Do you take a look at things that have succeeded in the past or things that your predecessor has done that have been successful and try to continue those? Or do you use more of an approach to kind of insert your own agenda in there?
That answer I can answer is the same from in my experience. Same nonprofit as well as elected. We have a retreat. At the beginning of every year, we'll get the new board of directors of the Texas Dental Association. We'll take them away someplace and we'll wine and dine them and have a nice, 2-day, 3-day retreat. And we will take a look at our previous priorities. We'll evaluate them. We'll cast out those that we don't want to continue with and move the remainder to today's agenda, add things to it, and do exactly the same way with the city. We'd go on retreats and we'd have the staff facilitate, or sometimes we'd go outside and get some individual who probably, most of the time they're former city managers, and they'd be the facilitator, and we'd review old priorities and identify new priorities, cast out the old, and bring the remainder up with the new.
Great.
And it's a great, I recommend that exercise. In political work, the problem is getting the general public to realize that is a good expenditure of money. I know every time we did it, we got beat up pretty good from the citizens about, I don't want my tax dollars going for you guys to go off to wherever and have a good time. And, well, we changed that because we stayed in town after some of the folks got upset. But it wasn't a good time. It was very much a working opportunity.
Were those your priorities or the city's priorities? How did you?
They were priorities, joint priorities of previous elected councils and staff, and then we injected not only mine as mayor, but all the other councils. It was a collective process. And obviously, if I had something that came up during the course of a month or a year, whatever, I could inject that in with the city manager, and I'd have him do what I consider due diligence on the viability of this particular issue. And then, because I felt very strongly, it wasn't Ben White's council, it was the council's council. And so if I had an idea that had run the test with the staff and it was viable, both from a practicality standpoint and a financial standpoint, then we'd put it on the agenda and it'd be discussed at workshop session of the council. And it'd either be voted up or down. And if I was persuasive and get the necessary 4 votes, that's in council work when you have a 7-person. The magic number is 4. Everything is 4. If you have 4, you get everything you want done. 4 votes out of 7.
Like the Supreme Court. But you didn't insist on consensus among them. You want a majority rule? Majority rule.
We did. Unless it was an issue that was going to entail a great deal of money. a lot of taxpayer dollars, then we would almost insist on the consensus. But otherwise, just simple majority.
So in the public administration literature, it has some kind of shortcut metaphors to describe what officials do. One of them is the accountable juggler. In other words, you try to keep as many balls in the air at one time as you can. A second one is a builder. That what you should be doing is trying to figure out what the key 3 priorities are, and then build the conditions so that those could be. And then the third one is an architect. You're kind of a strategist and a designer out there to come up with a good plan. So, is it a little bit of all 3, or do you have a particular?
I think it is, but probably my philosophy would be more the architect.
Architect.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah. I would sit and do a lot of listening, and then I would come up with what I thought was a viable means to the end, and then I would start laying the groundwork either with the staff or with certain council members to get that particular goal accomplished.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I would have guessed builder. But just-
Bill.
I mean, there was an old-time Washington public administration guy, and he spent a year studying, and they had his graduate assistants go around and track what city or agency leadership was about, and he came up with the accountable juggler idea.
Is there?
But that was Washington, D.C., so
Yeah.
a little bit different here, I think.
Well, we all had, I had my areas of interest, if you will, and something I was going to say. I guess if you ever move in, my advice, if you ever move into elected, desirably elected official, you don't always, what's the old saying, fall on your sword. You have your ideas, but test the water. I had some I was defeated for re-election after one term. I was, in retrospect, and you might have, I'd love to hear what you might have heard, but in retrospect, I think I was too adamant on some of my desires and what I was trying to accomplish. I'm very big in, again, having lived in San Antonio and having seen what the city council in San Antonio did years and years ago when they made the decision they wanted to become a destination city. They had something to offer and they wanted to become a destination city. So you see what San Antonio is today. College Station and Bryan is just ready for that to happen. We've got so much to offer here. I can tell you right now probably the names of 100 execs, association execs who would love to bring their annual convention to to College Station for their annual convention. But what do you need? You need a convention center. We don't have a convention center. We bought land while I was on the council to build a convention center, and now the current council is in the process of selling that land. So we're going away from what I think we should be doing, and I think I was a little bit, maybe too adamant on that. I felt very strongly that we should bring in our neighbors to the south, Weldon, and bring them into the city. Well, I was a little too strong on that issue, and shortly after the election, what happened is they brought Welborn into the city. I also feel like that maybe this goes back to my coaching days and my playing sports days. I can remember my coach always said, you know, White, if you fall down on the floor or on the ground, that's okay, but look good falling down. And so I had a basic philosophy. I think a city needs to look good. If they want to feel good about themselves, they need to look good about themselves. And I think we're long past the day where we need, for College Station, Texas, is a viable city hall, a seat of government, if you will. Now, that takes tax dollars, and people don't want to spend tax dollars for that, but that's some of the issues that I feel very strongly about, and it maybe cost me.
Mrs. Wade, did you want to comment on that?
Ben and I go back a lot of years. I did survive a run with him in Washington, D.C. and nearly died. He has stayed in really good shape. Looking back on all you've done, what would you say is the biggest lesson that you've learned?
Listen to people. Listen. I learned early on, not so much in my 11 years in Garden Ridge, but here in College Station, always with, I think it's the same with my exception. Two sides of the story. I would get phone calls, I would get visits from people at the, at my office at the city hall, and some citizens would have a problem with, the police chief. And I'd hear it and I'd think, no way that police chief is anything but wrong. I've got to go get him. And I'd go to the police chief and hear his side of the story, and it's perfectly acceptable. So I think listening to people, that's not too sexy or anything, but that's really what it is. Listen to people. Just listen to them. Yes, ma'am.
You used the analogy earlier about the bus driver and the riders, and how whenever you were executive director of the associations, that you were in one role and then you switched whenever you became an elected official. What were some of the challenges associated with that switch?
And again, I'm beating this horse to death, and I apologize, but I'm just adamant on the evils of micromanaging. And I would have problems with the elected officers of the Medical Society or Dental Association who would want to, not only do their job, they were good as a physician, good at delivering babies or orthopedic surgery or whatever. They were good at pulling teeth or filling teeth, but also they wanted to be good at running the Medical Society or running the Dental Association. And it just doesn't work that good. So what we had agreed early on is, doctor, you do what you do best, and let me do what I do best, and together we'll have a good team. And God's been good, but it's work. That philosophy's work. But just teamwork, micromanage. Don't micromanage. That answers some of your questions?
I was just wondering about if there was different from you being the one managing to being the other one. Like if there was
Right.
differences there.
And from that standpoint, I put myself when I was, in fact, a couple of people told me when I went on the council here, that remember, you're not an executive director anymore, you are the person in charge, and you've got what we call him city manager, but in effect he was the executive director. And so my ability of having been on the executive director side, in fact, I've had Glenn Brown tell me, he said, of all the years I've been in city government, which is 30 some odd, he said, the working relationship between you and I has been the best of any mayor I've ever worked with. And he said, I'm sure it's because of your background as an executive director of a nonprofit. Yes, ma'am.
Building off of that, I'm interested in going into city management, and you often hear the mayor as the elected official is more politically accountable, whereas the city manager is supposed to be nonpartisan, more apolitical, although that's often not the case. How would you say, having been both an appointed and an elected official, what are the different challenges in regards to responding to political influences?
Let me address the one from the city manager standpoint, because it's difficult. And again, Glenn and I talked many hours on this very subject. He was, and he had to have, and I hadn't mentioned this, but I'm surprised because I feel very strong about this too. Both as a city manager and as executive director or in a nonprofit, you have to have a servant's heart. He truly had a servant's heart as a city manager. He had years and years and years of experience. He could have probably told the elected people more how to do their job than they knew how to do their job. He was just that good. But he knew his role. And he knew he was the chief paid. I mentioned that term before. He was the chief paid for the city. And we were the chief elected. So it was, again, we sharing. And he would make a suggestion, or he would explore a possibility that maybe one of the council people had. And then he would state his point, make his case, if you will. And then whenever he sensed that it was going to go the other way, he would back off and he'd say, fine, y'all vote for it and I'll get it implemented for you. And that's the same way that I did in Barry County and Texas Dental Association. I'd let the board hash things out. I'd have my input. But then at the end of the day, if they voted in a way that wasn't the way I thought they should, I slewed it smartly and marched off and we got it done.
Obviously, Texas A&M is a large fixture here in College Station, and the university has its own leadership structure that is alongside the city leadership structure. So I was wondering if you could tell us how College Station, as the mayor or the city council, how they interact with Texas A&M's leadership to make this work.
I tell you what, that's one of my great memories I'll always have is my working relationship with Dr. Lofton. We work very, very closely. I was in his office, he was in my office all the time. So it's a great relationship. Dr. Gates was very, very good. we felt like as a city that, and I know I advocated, and even Mayor Silva before me, that we needed to have not just ever so often sit-downs with the leadership of A&M, but regularly scheduled. Dr. Gates he never wanted that. He thought, well, if there's a problem, give me a call and we'll address it. Dr. Lofton, we sat down regularly with him. In fact, and I guess it's still in effect, not only did we sit down personally, but once a month the president of A&M, the county judge, and the 2 mayors met for lunch. And we just all got on the same page. And they knew what we had on our mind, and we knew what they had on their mind, and what they were going to do, and et cetera. We were proactive versus reactive, whereas Dr. Gates was more comfortable with being, if there's a problem, we'll react to it and get it resolved. But it's very close communicative relationship.
One other thing I've grown to appreciate, having lived here since 2001, is how many community groups there are in Bryan and College Station, voluntary groups as well as nonprofits. And so how do you pick and choose who you develop relationships with? Who are the key stakeholders in that community that you work with?
Oh boy. That's tough to pick and choose because they're all taxpayers. They all have a vested interest. They all are voters. Then you got to certainly think of those things. But generally, any association or a group that would have a very positive impact on the daily operation of the city of College Station, I would try to. And that would be your developers, your realtors, some of your the Chamber of Commerce, obviously, and the Council of Governments, and people like that daily impact what happens with the city. We stayed in close contact with them. We had a very close relationship. This is not local, but the representatives from our elected officials in Austin and our elected officials in Washington, we stayed in very close contact with them.
How about the civic associations?
Well, remember the Lions Club? What I would do, and I'm not sure if this was done before, I did 2 things that I thought was, for me personally, was successful. I started with called Coffee with the Mayor. In fact, you want to hear, can I digress?
Sure.
That's how I met my wife. Coffee with the Mayor. It was just a once a month activity. We met in the down here in the conference center on Bush. We had coffee and donuts, and any citizen of the city could come and visit, have some coffee, have a donut with us. And I would always bring 1 or 2 department directors. So if you came this month and you had a question relative to the fire department, chances are the fire chief would be there. Most popular was our public works director, so he would come. Or our planning and our development director, he would come. And it was very, very successful. It worked well. Just digress if I may. I was representing the city of College Station on the Council of Governments. And I was, before one of the Council of Governments meetings, I was talking to a group of mayors from some small communities and telling them about the Coffee with the Mayor. And they were asking me questions, how do you promote it, blah, blah. So I was through with that. And this lady came up to me and said, I just overheard you talking about your coffee. Could you tell me something about it? And do you have any printed material? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I do. I said, I'd seen her, but I didn't know who she was. So let me get your name and phone number, and I'll have the city send you some material. So she gave me her name and phone number. Happened to be the mayor of Bedice. Anybody know where Bedice, Texas is? About 30 miles east of here, you're going to Huntsville, a little tiny town. And so I took her name and phone number, and a couple days later, my wife had just passed away some months prior. And I guess I was feeling sorry for myself or something. So a couple days later, I thought, I'm not going to have the city staff send her. I'll just call her and tell her I'll buy a lunch and I'll give her that material. So we did. Fish Daddies. And I'd been married 53 years when I lost my wife. And she had been married 39 years when she lost her husband. She and her husband were professors out of Texas Tech. And she had moved back to Bedice, became mayor of Bedice. So that's the story there. That's how we met. But
When are these coffees with the mayor?
watch these coffees with the mayor. Yeah, but it was fun. And had one other thing I want to talk to the mayor about, I was going to share. I've lost it, I'm sorry.
It's okay. My perception is that the folks that are studying for master's degrees feel some pressure to develop what they would consider, or sometimes called marketable skills. And I know this from when I did my work at Penn State School of Public Affairs. The state of Pennsylvania had a lot of requirements. So if you wanted to work in finance for city, local government, you had to have a certification in public finance. And so they set up programs in Penn State to do all that stuff. And is that true, as true in Texas? And even if it's not true, we have to have an official license. Are there certain skill levels that are expected before city managers are going to hire our graduates for positions within their government?
Again, my experience with Glenn, and it's one of those things, how does a person gain experience without someone giving them an opportunity? But here in College Station, they generally look for that person, whether it's going to be the staff person with the planning and zoning, whether it's a staff person with public works or the water department, if they have experience. If they're going to be at the managerial level, if they have that experience, that's what they're looking for. As far as a degree, that's not, most of them, well, all of them will have bachelors and many of them have masters, but it's not essential that it be in that particular area.
But some work experience,
Some work experience.
internships and that kind of thing.
Very poor. And nobody here is interested in association management, and believe me, I'm not trying to sell it, but since I'm telling you all about my family, I might as well tell you one more story. My son got his bachelor's here and then stayed on to get his master's in public administration with the full intent of going to work with the city somewhere. And apparently, unbeknownst to me, he had been watching over the years what I was doing, and I guess I'd come home and talk about what went on the medical side. And he came to work after he graduated, worked for me for 5 years as the assistant Bear County Medical Society director. A little nepotism there, but we didn't let that. And then he moved on, and he's now in like his 18th year, 20th year as the executive director of Texas Psychological. I think I mentioned that a moment ago, but he had no thought whatsoever when he was in grad school about going into anything other than working with the city, some public administration. So don't never say never. Don't close the door.
Can we talk a little politics? Is that okay? Anybody object? So we're some of us are glued to C-SPAN and the news about what's happening in Washington and the Tea Party movement and the fights between the House of Representatives and the Senate, part of American Government 101.
Yeah.
But is that a reflection of a problem, or is it simply a Washington, D.C. problem?
Let me answer, be my opinion only, my thoughts only, but first of all, thankfully at the local level in cities our size, you don't pair up against a Republican and a Democrat. So we run as elected officials here in College Station. We just run as independents, and we just run. Probably if you're in Dallas, San Antonio, then you would be a Republican Party. You hear the old story about within the Beltway, this happened within the Beltway. I've not hung out in Washington, D.C. as much as probably a lot of y'all have, or maybe you have. They have it's a fraternity up there, in my opinion. And it's just interesting how they arrive at some of their decisions. I was listening, just coming over here, probably y'all don't like Rush, but I was listening to Rush, and he was talking about this gridlock that they're in right now, and it's right down for the most part political lines. And in my humble opinion, before this country's going to return to the days, their glory days, as you like to hear people say, we're going to have to cross the aisle and start doing what's right for the country, and not for what's right for the Democrats or what's right for the Republicans, but what's right for the country.
How do we get there?
Good question. I'm the director of the Parkinson's Association. They don't have a cure for Parkinson's yet, and I don't think we have a cure for how we're going to get there yet. Well, I think some well-intentioned, well-meaning individuals, elected individuals, are going to have to put their their goals maybe and their desires to serve forever behind them, and let's just do what's right, even if it means, you know, you don't get your convention center and you get defeated at the next election. Still, you do what's right and try to move the country forward. And I just think that's what's going to have to happen, because we got now where we're so self-centered that it's not about what you did for me yesterday. It's what you're going to do for me today and tomorrow, and that's my opinion.
How about closer to home, Texas politics in Austin and the legislature there? Are they functioning effectively, more so than Washington?
Well, and you were there. You were there. If we had, in my opinion, we had more people like Senator Schwartz. I don't know if you know him or not. He's an orthopedic surgeon out of Georgetown, Texas. He was a rep for a number of years, and now he's in his first term as state senator. That's right here in Bryan College Station. I'm a fan of his. Again, I don't know how you feel about it, but if we had people like him, he's a good thinker. He might be all about himself, but if he is, he doesn't show it. He is about what's good for rural Texas and Texas in general. And he's an awesome representative, and we need a lot of Charlie Swartners, in my opinion.
How about in state government? What's your assessment of how effective the public administrators working for the state of Texas are doing? Are they do you value them as highly as you hire the city workers here?
Honestly, I need to be honest. No, I don't, but I don't know that much about them. I really don't know that much about, some of your more visible elected people or appointed people. I don't know. Yes, sir.
So you're the mayor of College Station, but we often hear the term Bryan College Station to be one inclusive city. And it's extremely difficult sometimes even to tell which city you're in. So I have to ask, what type of relations do you have between College Station and Bryan? And what's the working relationship there? How do they link up, and if you link at all?
Good question. Very good question. Sometimes, you ever heard the saying, grown men playing little boys' games? You ever heard that saying? I'll tell you a real story. The elected leadership, this is when I was mayor. I can't speak for now the last 3 years. The elected leadership when I was involved, were fighting tooth and toenails against each other. The city staffs could not have been more agreeable. Fire, police, EMS, public works, water, they were great. It was just us elected people that, I was very adamant that whatever was out there, I wanted it for College Station. And my colleague, Mayor Conley, whatever was out there, he wanted it for Bryan. It was in good nature, but it was intense. And they knew exactly, how the elected people of College Station. I was involved with a $9 million lawsuit. My name was on the document suing for $9 million. The city of Bryan sued the city of College Station over our landfill. So, that makes it tough to be real friendly. But it all worked out. You're living in Bryan. I know. But
it's better than it used to be.
It is.
It is much better
Much
than
better.
it used
Thank
to be.
goodness. And maybe I was part of the problem back then. But yeah, it is better than it used to be.
I'm talking 20 and 30 years ago.
Oh, okay. But it's pride. And I understand they have their pride. They want just the best, and I can appreciate and respect that, and we do too.
Well, time for one last question. Anybody got any burning questions you wanted to ask the mayor? I'll take the last one then. So, we graduate school in a major university, so we're looking at some high-sounding leadership role models, and so from history or from politics or from Texas, who have you read about? Whose biography are you interested in, and what big ideas have stirred you beyond what you've done in the day in and day out of politics and government?
You'd be surprised. That's what I say. Harry Truman. I'm a fan of Harry Truman. I think he came into power at an extremely difficult time. And also, he handled it very, very well. What he did, he was sort of the low-key type of, as I read history and understand it, a low-key type of person that, demanded what he wanted. He would fight for what he wanted, but be that as may, he was the proponent of the little man. Now, also because running close second probably be George Bush 41, because when I was here, and when I was mayor, we had a lot of opportunities to interface with him, and we never were, first name basis, but we were very cordial to one another, and we discussed things, and I had a lot of admiration for him.
A lot to think about there. Well, I have to say that politics gets such a bad name in the press and the media and all of that, and among certain groups, it's pretty easy to pick on it. But I've known only a couple of really political leaders in my time. One was a classmate of mine from college who went on is now a senator from Rhode Island, and Mayor White, and they both have very similar characteristics in the sense that they both have absolute bedrock integrity, and that caricature of sleazy politician or whatever doesn't ring true to me. And the more I'm around people like Mayor White, and I was around my college classmate quite a bit growing up, and very impressive individuals. And I think we're well served in America. And I hope all of you, those of you that aren't thinking about it now, will think about the opportunities that are out there. Because a lot of the work that the mayor did coming up was unpaid, volunteer positions, or very little pay, if anything at all. And so we wouldn't begrudge that of people like that. We need to tell more of those positive stories about all the good that folks like the mayor have done. So I'm very humble and honored to be here with you once again. And thanks so much for the message.
My pleasure. Enjoyed it. Good luck to you guys.
And we have a gift. You're probably going to have a collector's set of mugs from the Bush School before we're done here. I don't know if we gave you the same thing last time or not. Our records are kept, but
Thank you.
we do hope you'll appreciate it, and you give this to the other mayor if you've already got one.
Some of you ladies probably think that she has veto power at our house. I have veto power.
Okay, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you all.